Hello everyone and welcome to the Co-Creator Blast number 10. I am going to invite our lovely Elizabeth Lembke so that she also can participate to the event, and I have to figure out how we do that again. So let me find her. She's under HR Improv if you want to follow her. Zack. Done. Yes. Cool. So it's coming. Yes.
We are here. We are here.
Exactly. We arrived. We met and it's not even 6:30. So we're good with our timing.
I love it. I love it. I only say cheers to that. Oh, nice wine behind you.
Or for the French Bastille Day. So I don't have a wine open yet, but it's going to come for me.
Cheers to you and all of your fellow countrymen and women.
Thank you.
Cheers, cheers.
What are we talking about today? So we are doing our Co-Creator Blast on the Founders Rock Principles.
Yes.
Founders Rock Principles. And so we worked together and we had in our co-creator space, we think that something that's very important to start with is principles.
Yep.
And if you don't know what we're talking about, we are going to give you some examples, and I will start with the Human Rights Declaration. It's full of principles, how we should deal with people, how we should take care of them, and so on and so forth. We are Bastille Day, so we have to honor France right now. And the French principles of liberté, égalité, fraternité, so freedom, equity or equality, and brotherhood or humanhood are the basic principles that helped us build the country as it is. And we will talk about the fact that sometimes you should decide better on your basis principles because they may bring you in places you don't want to. And we have Elizabeth, you come from the US, so we couldn't stop us from thinking about the US
What it
Constitution.
should be, what we're trying to defend. Exactly. The U.S. Constitution, which is founded on the pieces around popular sovereignty, so that the people vote, limited government, so only what's really truly necessary and really understood and approved, separation of powers, so having the judicial branch, and the presidential and the jurisdiction, the checks and balances within that should hopefully work, the judicial review, federalism, and republicanism. We don't want to be a republic. Yes.
Yeah, and so those are
a dictator. Sorry, just
weirdly, like well, that's the principle, you know. The principle, it should work.
It should work.
And so when we think further, or things that are way, way older than the French and the American constitutions or principles, the 10 Commandments, don't kill people.
Yeah,
that's one of
it's pretty high up, isn't there? Yeah.
You know, they tried like thousands of years ago to give us some principles so that we could live together in peace, but somehow we still have problems.
And they were carved in rock. They were carved in stone.
They tried everything to convince us with the principles.
The word of God came down to give them. I mean, you can't get more direct than that. Okay, but moving on.
Yeah. You may wonder, who are those two crazy ladies talking about principles? And so that's why, well, we're not crazy, we're just normal. First, who are we? Elizabeth Lembke is with me today, and as every 2 other Tuesdays. And she is the Chief Talent Navigator. She's helping guide you through talent development, learning, and branding at Transforming Talent. And I am a work in process, so I'm a coach. I love organizational development, and I just help people find a purpose and just go for it. What did we do together with Elizabeth in the last few weeks? If you follow us on Instagram, you probably saw that we have some lives every 2 weeks or so. And we started by explaining what is Co-Creator Space. What are we doing here? Then we spoke about having no pain without no gain. Does it work? Then we spoke about luck, did you know, and all the things we collected, and especially Elizabeth, who's in love with research and all those things.
It's true.
She knows everything. So ask her. And we brought together the studies and the surveys that show that what we are doing is based on science. Don't break your glass.
Exactly.
Too late.
My glass got stuck with my sticks.
Oh, that's a problem. You have to adapt and thrive. That was the next topic, you know. And so we also spoke about learning, being learning fools, the need for us as organizations to enamor the user's user and to create value in a disrupted world. That's also about centering on the why. And 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the power of beliefs. And that's basically the first big idea in the first module of the Co-Creator.Space program. And today we're talking about principles because it's also in the first module. And it's beliefs, principles, and then comes next week culture. And it's the first module. That's the very big chunk of information. And so we are here to share what is a principle. And Elizabeth, you have thousands of ideas and examples. So share them with us.
Sounds good. That sounds good. So this really irritated my my science majors as well as my engineers when we said that a principle is like a natural law. So we know what will happen if I drop this pen. It will not defy the law of gravity. And that is the principle of gravity as per Isaac Newton. So that's what we've all learned in school. So the thing about like principles is that they're supposed to be universal and self-evident. Now, taking things into science, and this is going to be a metaphor. So it is not going to be exactly like the law of gravity. It is the piece to say, true though, principles are self-evident, they're universal, they're across multiple situations, and they help guide the values, they help guide the decisions that you make. And it's that piece to say a principle is essentially a belief about how you operate one's life, you know, when you're doing business, how you approach things, what you do or what you don't do. So, so examples are honesty is the best policy. So this is what we learned as many of us as good little girls in the US and elsewhere. And it could be that piece, okay, what would be dishonesty is the worst policy. So, how can we take that a little bit further? Okay, moving on. The next one would be if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. A lot of social media, a lot of trolls would not have anything to do if they were following this principle, but it is that piece to say. Here, if we are looking at how we approach things and then we approach others, these principles can guide us. So if you look on Quora, Sarah Stone, she actually did a really good job, I thought. She said, you know, a value is just that, something that you value, like honesty. A principle is a belief about how to operate one's life, how best to live or do business or do anything, like here, good girls go to heaven, for example.
Yeah, well, we don't even know if heaven exists, so I don't know.
Exactly. And bad girls go anywhere they want. That continues. So, you know, here, if we say the value is thrift, the principle could be we shop sales, discount, and used stores first. If the value is creativity, it's we test for creativity and we won't hire you if you're not. Google. Value is relevant, reasonable discourse and open conversation about nearly everything. Principle, we do the best to apply the be nice, be respectful policy fairly. Quora. Here, value democracy. Principle is one person, one vote. One would hope. Value controls. Principle, we have rigid rules and expectations and people need to fit themselves into these. Military, many US corporations, a lot of religious institutions. Value education. Every entry is open to edit, like Wikipedia. Value human life. principle behind that is we care for, protect, nurture, and provide for every fruit or sign of it on every tree. So these are the pieces, is that you can see the values, how they play out, and that they're really based on a founder's rock principle as to what really makes it thrive. And so we're going to dive into how do we really see those principles, and what are those principles for you, your organization, but also how do you guide your life? What are your kind of guiding principles that help you make the decisions to lead the life that you want to lead? Okay, so with that entry, we're going to go into this edition's theme song, and I turn it over to the wonderful Anne-Cécile.
Yeah, well, we looked at principles as songs. Weirdly, there were not that many. And so we ended up finding the principles of lust. And the funny thing is, the text, if you listen to it without the lust problem or the lust word, it does really mean what a principle is. So let me read the lyrics and I'll let you judge. The principles of lust are burned in your mind. That starts well, huh?
It does.
Yeah. Do what you want. Do it until you find love. Feel your heartbeat. The principles of lust are easy to understand. Do what you feel. Feel until the end. The principles of lust are burned in your mind. Do what you want. Do it until you find love. Start to move slowly, very slowly. The principles of lust are easy to understand. Do what you feel until the end. The principles of lust are burned in your mind. Do what you want, do it until you find love. And I think it's a good song to start the day, the co-creator blast, or to keep talking about principles, because there is this idea that they're supposed to be burned into our brain or somehow. But how we interpret them is also very different from one person to the other, and just mix people with different backgrounds, and then you're lost with principles, because everyone would say, no, my principle is life, then I live life this way. So the way we express our belief in a principle or in a value, I'm going back. When the value is life, some people may say, my principle is then to respect every life, but how you live the respect of life is different. Some people are for or against abortion, for example, and they do believe in the same value, and they do have a similar principle, but they just live it differently.
And I think that this is then a challenge. So, for example, a lot of taglines like every child, every day, every future. You know, these beautiful taglines, but when they're put under scrutiny as to what does this really mean when you're, you know, faced with different challenges or with different viewpoints from, to your point, there can be a very conservative versus a very liberal point of view around how do we approach these things. So last week was Pride Week. So this is an example of, you know, these beautiful tags are on things. Does that encompass everybody that's involved in the organization? And it's important to say, how are we actually fostering good discussions and critical discourse as to what are our principles for how we want to work, how we want to work together, and what we really envision as the respect and tolerance for different approaches. Or do we say, I was in a call for our circle last week, is we are intolerant to intolerance, and calling it out that way, and to say, okay, here it's not about inclusive for all things, it's to say, hey, we are very vocally anti-racist, for example. And that's the piece around not just taking, like Anne-Cécile said, a principle and just having it on a poster or believing it to be face value and that everyone understands it. It's important to say, how are we having actually good constructive discourse as to what does this principle mean, and how does it guide the decisions that we make as to what do we do and what do we not do. And so as we go forward, and, you know, here I think the piece around how we see the values, how do they play out. So, for example, there was a good article in Adventures with Agile where they were saying, you know, values are the roots of the belief that matter and are part of the field practitioner, while the ethical guidelines that govern how we practice our craft are like courage to speak up, psychological safety, love for one another, appreciation for different viewpoints. And so those are the pieces around the things that are the values, which are, you know, if we look at Scrum, courage, focus, commitment, respect, but also openness, if we're just talking about Agile. And so here, you know, if we look at the Scrum versus, you know, kind of XP, is that piece around simplicity. So, you know, communication, feedback, respect, courage. So you can have these things as part of your professional, what do you value, you know, what's important, how do you interact? And that's what we see oftentimes in the values. And then they're really based around some principles. So again, staying with this Adventures with Agile, saying, okay, a principle is a call to action specific to the context. So here, for example, just staying with Scrum would be something they constantly reiterate is this deliver value continuously and make people awesome. So the things that come up in the Agile Manifesto are principles. So it's that piece to say, it's also one of the pieces to say, as a group or as a team comes together, they need to determine what are our principles for the way we work. You know, here, how do we make sure that, you know, if the value is people are awesome, what do we say about the principle is about how we go about it. So that's that piece to say here, principles are rules or laws that are just really that piece to say there really should be unchanging and really universal across many different situations. The go-to book that a lot of people got exposed to when it came to principles was, of course, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which came out, I think, in the late 70s. But the values of first things first, here, what are they? My goodness. First things first, think win-win. My goodness, you know, it's not that I haven't taught this. So it's here. Okay, sorry. So the very first one is be proactive. Sorry. So before you can do anything, you have to say, okay, how am I approaching it? It's not just action oriented. It's not just running and then hoping that will help, but it's that stopping to think, to say, okay, what could be a good solution to this? Who do I need to involve with this? And how do I do it? And then actually taking that first step. Again, it's not action orientation. It's this piece to be proactive thinking. The next one is beginning with the end in mind. So here, Anne-Cécile and I with Co-Creator.Space saying, you know, how are we innovating the way that teaming works, you know, for adaptive solutions? We want to improve people's experience at work. We want to have fulfillment at the core. We want to tap into the plurality of thought. So those are our pieces around when we were creating Co-Creator.Space around what is our end in mind. And we use that to work backwards to say, okay, and then how do we do it? What are the modules that are important? And then how can we make sure that it's not just for a small group of people, but that really anybody here on Instagram, on YouTube, etc., can be, we can talk to you guys and have those ideas and have that discourse. So really testing it together with you and co-creating, that was part of our end in mind. The next one, of course, is then that what I mentioned before is if that's true, how do we make sure that we put the first things first? So making sure that the things that matter most don't get thrown away for the things that matter least. You know, here the busyness of life and the noise, to say how we're making sure that we're paying attention to the things that truly are the most important and taking time for them. Goes on to say, okay, here when we're and that's all personal work. So, and this is also that piece around when we're talking about co-creation, we also touch on a lot of these different principles similar to Stephen Covey, because it is that piece of how am I developing myself first and getting that center before I go into interaction with others. Because I can't, you know, we all know the saying, you know, when you're pointing at someone else, there's 4 fingers kind of pointing back at you. Exactly. So this is that piece. You can't expect someone else to change. What do you have locus of control over? You. So this is that piece to say we have to start with ourselves first. And that's similar in Co-Creator.Space. It goes on to say, okay, what are those paradigms around how are things interdependent? And this is a big piece about what we do at co-creation is we don't think anyone acts alone. You're always working with other people. There's always common dependencies. There's always this piece of it's actually more beautiful to do real teaming because you become much more adaptable in terms of what are the solutions that you can offer, because you integrate those different perspectives. You have divergent thinking, you have convergent thinking, and that makes it better. You listen not only to the customer, you listen to the customer's customers. You know, what do they need them for? And it's a very humble process, but it's also an important one, because it is that piece to say not only inclusion, but also what are we doing this for? And that there's clarity around that purpose, like Anne-Cécile started with. Think win-win. So this is that piece to say, I'm not going to, you know, our purpose is not to squeeze out money from Joe Schmo and do something wrong. It's really this piece of, we want mutual benefit. And it's that theory of abundance, you know, just that we're doing something like this doesn't mean that no one else can do anything and this has to be our idea or nothing. No, it's this piece to say, hey, we can win from each other. So how do we go about that in terms of our business dealings, but also the dealings that we have with each other?
Yeah.
The next one is one where I think a lot of people have a challenge with, because we oftentimes listen to respond rather than listen to understand. And it's the principle of seek first to understand and then to be understood. So this piece to say, you know, we've talked about empathy before. So how are we really feeling with someone? How are we really understanding? You know, as we look to customer experience, empathy maps are a big piece of it, is to say, okay, where are people coming from and how do we get in there and really truly sense, rather than making assumptions, which are basically lazy. That's lazy work.
Yeah. But it's easy work, and you do it because you're sure, no? Yeah. And you think you know.
Yeah, you think you know. And those are the things, yeah, exactly. That's why, you know, employee surveys are important, etc. To say you think you know. Well, exactly. Here, let us help you with that.
We come and we let you know that you don't know.
Exactly. And then the next one is synergy. And this is, everyone hates this word, but, and I do understand because it became way too corporate speak. But you have to, but if one thinks about synergy, you think about it like as an orchestra or birds flying together, to say, how are they working together in such a way that they get into that beautiful space that is flow. So this is that constructive collaboration. This is that piece to say, you know, here building upon other ideas, you know, that someone can paint in my picture, I can paint in someone else's picture, and it's something better than if we were just doing it on our own. Yeah.
And I think another word could be also transcendence. Because when we transcend differences, then we can flow. And I prefer this word to synergy because it's always the business word, but transcendence, transculturality, transgender, between both, and being able to be one and the other, but also in the middle.
That's interesting, because I hadn't thought about it that way. Okay.
Yeah, for me, it's like two bubbles connecting, and so that's transcendence. They stay. They have their core, but like their core being, but they can connect and color each other. But it doesn't change who you are. I don't know, like that's how I see transcendence.
No, that's really interesting, because for me, transcendence is really also this piece of, you know, how does your soul kind of grow and build upon. So it's, you know, for me, transcendental has always been like a very spiritual experience. So I never thought about it as that way. So yeah, but at the end of the day, that's true in terms of the effect or the feeling. Is there's such a pulse, and when synergy really happens, when people are really getting into that flow of work, it is very magical. It's very transcendental, to use your word, to see what's possible, and that this piece around what is that abundance that can happen. It's like when musicians jam, you know, they don't, you know, they can maybe start with a word, or, you know, look at the Rolling Stones, what they do with their music that they've been playing for at least 40, 50, 60 years, long time. You know, they're still able to have variations and play with it. And that's the piece of what that value is, in terms of how are you able to transcend what is there into something more and more, I'll just put more beautiful.
Yeah, it's basically co-creation.
Yeah, thanks, honey. Thanks, honey. I love it.
That's what we aim for.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. And then there's, of course, the piece around sharpening the saw, which is the seventh habit, which is this piece to say, how are we making sure that we're taking care of ourselves in terms of, just to say, you know, the spiritual, the mental, the physical, and the relationship, social health, which are very important now, you know, as we're going through this pandemic. How are we, you know, taking care of ourselves, and also the relationships that we're in. And I think that this is that piece as we look to the principles. You know, this is for highly effective people, but it is that piece also to say, as you look to, you know, the eighth habit is also, of course, how are you developing others? So these are our different pieces in that pie. It has a very long X scores to say, this is where the analogy or the metaphor came from, but it's actually more in terms of how, you know, how do you kind of see the world as kind of not dictating, but guiding your decisions. So, you know, for us within the co-creator, our principles are everything must start from desire. You know, if you don't want to, you're not going to.
Yeah, no one will.
Yeah, it's like me with my diet, you know, at the end of the day.
What? Are you talking about those things?
Exactly. All of my vegetables when I get around to it.
I don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. So everything with desire, and then the necessary skills and knowledge will follow, because then there's a different sense of urgency, willingness to, you know, stick to your seat or whatever it is, and carry it out. The next one is value creation in a volatile world. The users, like we were saying with the empathy maps, and really understanding what do they need, why do they need it, and you know, this opens up the possibilities as to what are different ways that you could solve that problem. Yeah. So it's like, it's that piece to say, why would they be thankful and actually need what you're offering? The next one is something that's very near and dear to our hearts. It's that piece to say the future of work is social. It's adaptive, and it's very personal. Okay, so these big, large talent pool groups, these et cetera, is where you're throwing everyone in together. You still have to make it personal. I think that's why chatbots, oddly, have become so popular, because people have missed that truly personal experience. And it's ironic a little bit that chatbots seem to be delivering that better than at times people. But it is to that piece to say, how do we design things so that the personal interaction is so set to that person that it seems seamless, and that what's trying to be accomplished, etc., is easier, and that there's a matching of technology and people. So we like to call it Centurion talent. So this piece to say, how do we make sure that that we look to those pieces, and this is then that fifth one, that people working together with technology and technology working for people ties in very closely to that social, adaptive, and personal. Yeah. Soft is the new hard. So these pieces around social skills, you know, particularly in the pandemic, that's becoming very, very apparent. And that uncertainty is the new black. You know, this piece, we could have not predicted that better. Yeah, we could not have predicted that better. And then the last one that really fosters our co-creation principles is this piece to say, not everything must be an innovation, yet everything is subject to evolution. So, and this is that piece that it's not a department that's responsible. It's this piece around the inclusion, and everything can be evolved if it's no longer fit for purpose, to question what is the actual purpose, and how do we get behind that. So those are those things. And as you look to how you run things, as you look to what you're doing in your daily work, it's also that piece to say, how am I interacting? How am I engaging with people? This last week, I ran a sourcing summit virtually, and I was the master of ceremonies for 4 days and nights. And we met, this was, you know, over almost 700 people, 70 speakers around the world, from Japan, Malaysia, to Brazil, to the US, to Canada, Africa, Australia, Southern Hemisphere. We had 18 different countries speaking. It was incredible. And it was that piece to say, we gathered around these very core common principles as to how do we want to run this experience together. The first one was mindset first. to say, okay, are we, you know, not there yet? So this openness. The second one was talent is everywhere. You know, it's not in the UK. It's not, you know, only here, there, or the hot spots that we're used to looking at it. It's really everywhere. Innovation can happen anywhere. The best ideas come out of creative collaboration, and the core is respect. Be willing to listen, be willing to learn, and be willing to share. And this was really magical in terms of those guiding principles really set the stage for a very good virtual experience, where it was surprising. We had the discussion as to, hello, Miss Lizzie, as to, you know, do we go back to face-to-face? And one of the interesting discussions, particularly from our friends in the Eastern Bloc, like Romania, Ukraine, but also Brazil and Africa, so South Africa and Ethiopia, they said, you know what, this is wonderful. Otherwise, no one ever comes to us. We can't have these educational experiences. Here we're talking with our heroes, and we're learning from other peers, and otherwise we wouldn't ever be able to do that. So this was that piece to co-creation, to say, how do we rethink what that virtual conference experience is, and how can we make it better, because we're taking that different plurality of thought. And so this, just to kind of give a little bit of examples as to what one can do when you're looking at the principles to make for a good experience.
And that's where we, you know, after looking at all those perspectives on principles and understanding where they come from, what they have for an influence, and seeing that you may have principles and experience them differently. It's the question about what are your values. Like when you look at your organization as a person, because it starts always with a person. What are your personal values, and do you find them again in your organization? Do you know them? Like, simply, can you name 3 of your core values? Yes or no? And if you can't, go in the internet, look for a list of core values, and sit down and say, what does talk to me? What does? And then look at how do those core values or values translate into actionable principles. And maybe take the time with, well, first with yourself, to write down those actionable principles. And if you are in a team, talk openly with them about that. Hey, what are our principles? How do we know what's right and wrong for us? How do we know that we crossed the line or not? And how do we make sure that the values that we have as a team are respected? And what does it mean for us? And that, I think that's it's a core conversation to have, but so many people don't have it. They just work together, and then there are tensions, and if they just spoke about those principles and how they express them or live them in their daily life and daily work, many things would be much easier. That's even more true when we come from a diverse background, which is like becoming the new reality. More and more people are coming from all around the world and working together. I think the Corona crisis gave us the opportunity to see we can work online, and it works well. Like, it's not the terrible thing we had in mind. And so looking at that and being like, okay, what are those principles for you in your organization and in your culture? Because you come from a culture, and there is the national culture, but there is also the family culture. And you had all those, maybe you have confronting principles and values, and you find yourself between two, and you're like, should I be a good girl, or should I, like they say, be strong and say what you want, but at the same time I have to be nice? How do you not freeze with that? And then maybe what are the principles that you want to follow, like for you as a person? And how would those principles have an influence on your decision making? Because at the end of the day, why do we ask ourselves all those questions about principle? Why is it important in co-creation? Because it's helping us to make decisions and not always wait for someone to tell us what to do. If we want to be able to co-create, we need to know what we believe in, so those core values, in which kind of principles they translate. And when we are into those moments of uncertainty, go for your principles. Follow
Exactly.
them.
Principles over process. Yeah.
And it's the compass. Like, it's basically, if you're lost, you take your principle and you're like, okay, what do they tell me? Oh, okay, we go in this direction. I should be okay. But at least you have something to grip in times of uncertainties. And I think that's probably why so many people freaked out when Corona came, because they were like, I'm lost, I have nothing. I don't even know what to do with my work, because they didn't know what principles they were supposed to follow as they transition from working in an office to working from home. And like, there are so many things about those decisions that were made out of, they're in a stress situation, they took a decision and they couldn't really talk about those principles, and many stress that people had in this transition from offline to online happened, I think, most of the time because they didn't have the time to talk about what are the principles for us when we start to work from home.
Exactly. And so I think that just last week, Harley Davidson got in trouble because they branded their rewiring. So talking about the branding, so not this piece around what is that at core, your people are losing the job. So the piece around principles, it's not about branding. It's really about, when times are tough, what are your guiding principles for how you make decisions? And so it's that piece to say, we don't do employee experience for the brand. Employees make the brand. So very similar as we look to your point as to what are the things that we follow. Is it this piece to say we need to make our quarterly numbers, or how do we go about this? So it's the principles around fairness and equity, etc., are very important, and they are going to be put to the test as times get tougher. So values, etc., are usually very pretty on the wall when everything's going great. But they really, when times get tough, you cannot give up on your principles. You cannot give up on your values. It's that piece to say, how do you stay true to those values, such as, here, people working together with technology working for people. How do we make those ethical decisions as to what we can do and what we should do? This is that piece to say you still have a choice. And so when you're looking at the principles for you, for your organization, or also the team, or you can even have these as your family, here. Dinner together or Saturday morning breakfasts, that's important because we need to come together and connect. So connection is that principle about how, and then it plays out into how you do it. And so this, like Anne-Cécile said at the beginning, this is part of that module 1 of co-creation, is spending that time to say, here we have the co-creator principles. Here, Anne-Cécile has the principles for how she works. I have principles for how I work. They're all very similar, and they really go to that same common spirit. But unless there's that alignment to say, yes, this truly does help guide our decisions, then they're nice posters on a wall. Yeah.
And I think what will be interesting is to keep talking about this module number 3, and about the part of culture, to see what it means, and what it is about culture that we need to take care of as co-creators in our space.
So I love it.
This is it for today. I think
we appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much. And if you like us, share, do those things that you're supposed to do to support people. It would be awesome if you could share the video with your peers, if you think it's, bringing you value, or if it's bringing you questioning, where you're like, I didn't think about this way. And the videos will be on YouTube, because I upload the videos afterward on YouTube. And we are on LinkedIn, so you can find us, Co-Creator.Space, on LinkedIn, YouTube, as I said, and Instagram. And we have a website, Co-Creator.Space, where you can just see how creative we can be with a website. That's how we did it.
I love it. I love it.
So I think we're done for today.
Yep, I think we are. And with that, I think we need to go into the principle of celebrating our French compatriot. And congratulations. Happy Bastille Day.
Yeah, thank you.
Exactly. And then you may now pop open one of your glasses of wine.
Yes, that's what I'm going to do. And good
Perfect.
food.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.